Close your eyes. And let's take a nice slow inhale together. Oh, and just open your mouth and sigh it out. Meditation is a time where we set aside the busyness of our day, our to-do lists and our grocery lists, where we settle in and make that journey, that 18-inch journey from our head into our heart. And so I invite you to make that journey with me, focusing your attention on your heart space, picturing a glow of beautiful, brilliant light around your heart. Feeling the warmth of that light. And seeing it on every inhale, expanding from your heart, going throughout your body. And on every exhale, contracting back around your heart space. Allowing that loving, peaceful light energy to expand and flow through your body and return home to your heart. And as you bask in that, let's take a few moments in silence. And as we continue to breathe, we let that energy nourish us, knowing that we belong. We belong to ourselves. We belong to God. We belong with each other. The light of God shines through you as you. And so it is. Amen. Go ahead and come on back. So what if I told you that there is one thing that can impact how long you live, whether or not you reach your goals, how much money you make, how well your kids do in school, how you cope with stress and failure, what your overall mood is like, and even influences how much physical pain you feel or not? What if I told you there was one thing that influenced all that? What would you say?
Give it to us.
Tell me what it is. Tell me what it is, right? And whatever that thing is, you'd probably want to make sure that you're doing it pretty well, wouldn't you? Okay, now what if I told you that that one thing is the quality of your relationships? According to research at Stanford and author Dr. Henry Cloud, relationships have a huge impact on our well-being. How long we live, are the amount of pain we experience, and on and on and on. And this isn't just about your primary relationship, not just your spouse or your partner, but your relationship with your parents, with your kids, with your coworkers, with the people you volunteer with your neighbors, with your landlord, with the person at the checkout line in the grocery store, your doctor, your banker, the candlestick maker. All sorts of relationships, and the quality of them has a profound impact on our lives. So today we're going to talk about the spiritual significance of relationships, what can sometimes go wrong, and what we can do about it. So why are relationships important? Well, number one, I think it is through other people that we get a fuller understanding of spirit and a fuller understanding of what it means to be human. I've been meditating recently on this idea of oneness. It's a term we use a lot, but what is oneness exactly? So I've been pondering it, trying to wrap my mind and my heart and my inner understanding around it. And here's a few things that I thought of. When we say we're one with God, does that mean we're the same as God? We're certainly expressions of God, but God is so much more, so much bigger than just the expression of me, right? So oneness doesn't necessarily mean the same, though we have these 12 divine qualities made in the image and likeness of God. We have these qualities within us. God and I are not exactly the same, even though we are one. And what do we mean when we say we're one with other people? Well, that certainly doesn't mean we're the same as other people, right? I don't think we're exactly the same, right? We're not exactly the same. We are the same in that we're each unique expressions of God, but yet we're different. So oneness doesn't mean sameness. So here's what I thought about, and I want to invite you to think about this too. Think about all of the experiences you have had in your life up to this point. Your childhood, adolescence, those difficult teenage years, as a young adult, as a parent, and on. All of these things that you have experienced in your life up to this point. Those experiences have impacted you, haven't they? The things that you've gone through and endured, the lessons that you've learned, those moments of pure bliss and joy, those things shape who we become. They shape the expression of the divine that we are. In fact, it was one of you in our 5 principles class who reminded me of this. This profound truth that we are shaped by our experiences, and yet at the same time, we are so much more than just the sum of what has been done to us and what we have done. So if you think about all of these experiences that you've had in your life that have shaped you, maybe inspired you to pursue a certain career or to live in a certain place, or inspired your personality, whether or not you became a parent, I bet that a lot of those experiences had to do with other people, right? So people have a huge impact on our life. Not just the people who raised you and that you grew up with, but your siblings, your teachers, your mentors. People have an impact on us in good ways and less so great ways too. So relationships are important because people help shape us and shape our life experiences. And all of these people, all of the people that have touched your life in some way, in big ways and in small ways, all of the people who you have ever known, all of the people who have ever lived, all of those nameless faces that you see as you're going about your day, where you don't know their stories, you don't know their name, you don't know who they are. Just think about all of those people, each with a life experience of triumphs and tragedies like yours. Charles Fillmore, co-founder of Unity, said in his book, The Atom-Smashing Power of Mind, the great need of the whole human family is to understand that we are not separate nor insignificant, but the vital, important, integral parts of a mighty whole. In order to begin to comprehend oneness and the vastness of God, we can start by imagining all of those people and know that each of those people is an expression of God, God expressing uniquely as them, God expressing uniquely as you and you and you. And all of that put together, all of those tiny little snapshots of the expression of the divine, all put together, every living being on this planet gives us just the tip of the iceberg of all that God is. This is why relationships are important, because relationships shape the expression of God that we grow into. And our relationships with other people give us a snapshot into the vastness of all that God is. So relationships are not just a part of our human experience. They are a part of our spiritual journey. And having deep, authentic connections with others helps us live longer, happier lives and supports us on our spiritual path. Now, here's the problem. Relationships are hard, right?
Right.
And I think there's one thing that tends to get in the way of relationships. So I have a little video I want to share with you. And it's about that one thing I think gets in the way. Well, one of the things that gets in the way, and that's blame.
How many of you, when something goes wrong, the first thing you want to know is whose fault it is? Hi, my name is Renee. I'm a blamer. Let me just tell you this quick story. So this is a couple of years ago when I first realized the magnitude to which I blame. I'm in my house, I'm on white flats and a pink sweater set, and I'm drinking a cup of coffee in my kitchen. It's a full cup of coffee. I drop it on the tile floor. It goes into a million pieces, splashes up all over me. And a millisecond after it hit the floor, right out of my mouth is this: damn you, Steve. Who's my husband? I let me tell you how fast this works for me.
Are you all familiar with Brene Brown and her work?
Yeah.
Quite a few of you, yeah. If you're not, check her out. She's one of the leading researchers on vulnerability and relationships. She's very insightful, very holistic, and very deeply spiritual. So blame. Blame is something I think has been around for as long as humans have been around. I mean, think about the story of Adam and Eve, right? They had one rule: do not eat the fruit off the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And what do? They eat the fruit. God comes and he confronts Adam about it, and Adam says, well, Eve told me to do it. So God goes over and asks Eve about it, and she's like, well, it was the serpent's fault. So blame seems to be a natural human tendency. We want to blame. And blame arises from our little s self, our human self, our ego mind. You know, there's a lot of interpretations of the Adam and Eve story, but one of my favorite metaphysical insights into it is looking at the story as the birth of the ego. Father Richard Rohr, who, if you're not familiar with his work, is another great person to check out. He's a Franciscan friar, Catholic, but deeply spiritual, and writes a lot of things that resonate really well with unity. He says that there are two needs of the ego: to feel separate and to feel superior. What better way for the ego to feel separate and superior than blaming? You see, blame harms our relationships because it puts up a wall between me and you. It makes you the bad guy, so I can stand here and feel good about myself. Blame is a barrier to our spiritual growth because it stops us from practicing principle number 2 of unity: to see the divine in each other. Blame blocks us from our own spiritual growth because it stops us from looking inward. Let's face it, when someone pushes our buttons, it is easier to say, this is your fault, than to be vulnerable enough to take a look inside and ask, what's my part in this? Or what is going on inside me that I am trying to cover up or run from or hide from by making you the problem? It's safer for the ego that way. It meets the needs of the ego to be separate and to be superior. We often go to this anger and blame because it's something that's directed outward. But underneath our blame, there is usually something within us that is calling for our attention. Instead of blaming, we can do what many call the highest spiritual practice: observing our inner life without judgment. Inviting the love and the wisdom of spirit to move with us as we take a look at what is going on inside us when we feel that need to blame. This is vulnerability, being willing to look at yourself with the eyes of spirit, with love and without judgment, but with honesty. And vulnerability, I believe, is a spiritual superpower and the antidote to blame. Marianne Williams says the spiritual journey is the unlearning of fear and the acceptance of love. Blame lives in this energy of fear. Fear of being known, fear of being seen, fear of being rejected, fear of being judged. Vulnerability, on the other hand, lives in the energy of love. Vulnerability says, I love myself and I love you enough to be honest about how I'm feeling and where I'm at right now. Because when we can be vulnerable enough to let our authentic self, our highest self, our Christ light show, when we can be that vulnerable and let down our defenses, we create the landscape that we need to build authentic connections that will support us and lead to healing and to transformation. So how do we practice being vulnerable? Well, according to Brene, the definition of vulnerability is uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. That doesn't sound very fun. But Brene goes on to say, vulnerability is not weakness. And in fact, according to her research, vulnerability is the best indicator of courage, of bravery. Practicing vulnerability can be really, really scary. But I want to give you a few spiritual practices that you can do to start building and getting more comfortable with vulnerability so that it will support you in deepening your connections and relationships and support you on your spiritual path. Number one, get vulnerable with yourself. Get tuned into what you're feeling and what you're experiencing. Not what you're thinking, what you're feeling. I feel excited. I feel envious. I feel apathetic. A lot of us weren't taught the language of our feelings other than maybe being sad and mad. And so this alone can be a huge insight into yourself just by taking time to get tuned in. So I recommend what I call a 5x5 meditation. It's 5 times a day, a 5-second meditation. It goes like this. You place one hand on your heart, one hand on your belly, and you close your eyes and you take a deep breath in and you ask, how am I feeling right now? And it may be hard at first to really identify and name that feeling. If you struggle with that, you can get on the internet and Google feelings wheel or list of feelings. And it sounds silly, but think about it. How many of you think you could name off the top of your head more than 10 feelings? Most of us probably can't. So taking the time 5 times a day, 5 seconds, to do that short meditation to tune in to your feelings and name them can increase your comfort level with vulnerability. Another practice that you can use is to use this blame game that Brene talked about, this tendency to blame others, even if you never say it out loud, right? That blame that just pops up in your head when you're feeling frustrated or vulnerable or scared. Use that as your cue to go within. Invite spirit into your heart and ask, what is really going on in my soul right now? What am I trying to cover up with this blame? Show me. I'm ready. Another way you can practice vulnerability is by asking for help. So many of us take on more than our fair share, and we feel like we have to do it all. So being brave enough and vulnerable enough to ask for help invites other people into relationship with us. And it lets us be supported by spirit expressing through another. Along with asking for help is learning to say no sometimes, but we'll talk about that more in 2 weeks. Another way to practice vulnerability is to give and receive honest feedback. This can be really, really hard. I used to struggle a bit with feedback because you see, my identity, what my ego said I was the smart one who had all the answers. Anybody else have that mask? Yeah? Okay. And so what it loves to hear is that I'm perfect and I do everything right. But as my spiritual journey progressed and as I started getting more vulnerable, I realized that I was better equipped to handle honest feedback. And not only that, but I wanted it. Because see, here's what happens when you have the same mask that I do of I need to be the smart one who has all the answers. Even when people compliment you, you think they're probably lying. So when I was able to get vulnerable and actually start inviting regular, honest feedback, even if it wasn't good feedback, the great part about that is now I don't think people are lying to me. Because I try to create a space where people feel like they can tell me the truth. And that's a lot of work and work I'm still doing. But it's amazing how transformative it can be to know that you can give truly honest feedback and that you can receive truly honest feedback. Another way to practice vulnerability when you're ready is to sit down with somebody that you trust, that you know is a safe person for you to be vulnerable with. Now, if you're thinking about somebody in your life and you just know, if you were really honest with them, they would tell you how it was all your fault, or they would try to fix you, or they would one up your story with a more tragic story of their own. Those are not the safe people. Those are not the people to practice vulnerability with. But maybe you have a friend here in this community who might be willing, maybe you make agreements between the two of you, that we're going to sit down for 20 minutes and we're each going to practice being vulnerable with each other. It is amazing how freeing that can be to have just one person you can be fully vulnerable with, who won't try to give you suggestions or solutions or give you an affirmation to get rid of it all, but just sit with you and hear you. For those of you who are participating in our soul circles, that can be a really great place to practice this vulnerability as well. Unity Minister Reverend Eric Butterworth says to live your life, to lift your life to a higher dimension, you must think, act, and live from that higher dimension. So to live from a higher dimension, recognize the impact and the importance of the relationships in your life. Make a commitment to yourself to do your absolute best to stop blaming and criticizing others. And then shift to a higher consciousness of vulnerability, starting with being vulnerable with yourself and gradually working up to being vulnerable with others who are safe for you to do so. That way, you can express more and more of the divine essence of God that you are and continue to unfold your Christ light, as well as honor that light within others. Namaste.